I'm Lee Rensimer. I'm a lecturer at UCL and I'm involved with the Center for Global Higher Education. But we have a beautiful panel here today of, well, possibly 3 or 4 different presentations relating to private provision in higher education. We're going to start with our first one, which is in person. Actually, we've got Edward Moyonga joining us here, University of the Free State, also UK-based scholar. And floor is yours. I'll plug you in. Where's the presentation button? I like to change. Select room, Teams. I'm very sorry. I'm going to need to grab David. Does this not second screen? Let's see. If we do that, shouldn't that? That's really, that worked in the previous panels, and I don't know why it's not now. What do you do?
It's the HDMI.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Wow, perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for yeah, for the 3 of you in person. Thank you very much to the online audience. Yeah, so my presentation it's focusing on private provision of higher education as a public good in the African context. So I look at the themes of equity as well as quality. I look at 2 countries in Southern Africa, that is Malawi and Zambia. Okay, so at the time of applying for the conference, I was just finalizing my postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of the Free State in South Africa. So as a way of introduction, I just want to take you to these few statistics, which I think most of us know, like, Sub-Saharan Africa continues to be confronted with the issues of access to higher education in terms of the low levels of enrollment. However, there's also, on the other hand, there's the increase in terms of student enrollment, especially in the past 10 years. Partly, this has been attributed to the diversification of various players in in the private higher education sector. And one of them is the private higher education sector. So according to data from UNESCO, as well as scholars such as Tamrat and Tefera, they've argued that the private higher education sector constitutes about 1/3 of students in the world, which is like 3%. And the majority of these students are concentrated in Latin America as well as the Caribbean. For Africa, however, the percentage is still 18%, meaning that they haven't been doing much. However, even if this number is quite small, it's still very, very important that we still look at its contribution insofar as human development is concerned, insofar as providing higher education as a public good. Now, when we talk of the involvement of the private higher education sector, in the provision of education as a public good, of course, there are several debates. So to start with, most scholars who've written on the concept of either public good or the common good role of higher education, scholars such as, of course, Simon Marginson, a common name here, they've located the role of universities within the communities, within the societies in terms of fostering development. And this development can be, of course, at global level, regional, as well as at a community level. And so because of this, most universities, because of this conceptualization of the public good role of higher education, the assumption and the common argument is that provision of university education as well as funding, it should be left in the hands of the public sector. In Africa, I think this was a common assumption as well as a common practice, especially after independence, when higher education was part of the national agenda, or it was attached to what was called by then the fruits of independence, where higher education provision was considered more as a baby of the government, which was to be given to the citizens as a fruit of political independence. However, things started changing in the late 1970s, early 1980s, with the structural adjustment policies, meaning there was a shift in terms of provision of higher education. And so that period now saw a lot of diversification in terms of other actors who then came on board and started offering higher education. Right now, of course, we all agree that, even if public good benefits of higher education, especially in Africa, in as much as we can acknowledge this, it is also true that the total cost of higher education are substantially higher than the available public sources of finances. And then this realistically then calls for other alternatives or the involvement of other stakeholders in the provision of higher education as a public good. And I like this quotation by scholars such as Denolin and Townsend, who've argued that, the public good can be provided by actors other than the government. And this is where my study comes in. So I look at Malawi and Zambia. So just for the context, Malawi and Zambia, they are located in Southern Africa. These are former British colonies with a very much British system of education and governance. So in looking at private higher education, I look at it from two angles. Is it a boon? Is it a bane insofar as public good services is concerned? So just to understand, this is just a brief history of the evolution and development of the private higher education sectors in both countries. So as of 1964, when these two countries got independence, there were no universities in the two countries. according to President Kaunda of Zambia, he argued that, as far as British history is concerned, especially in the provision of education in the colonies, he said the British policy in Zambian higher education was the most criminal because they left the country without a university. So 1964, Zambia did not have a university. The first university was opened in 1966 by the Kaunda government, and then the rest is history. So we see that from 1966 up to 2025, there is this improvement in the number of institutions, especially the private higher education sectors, which now outnumber the public universities. Okay. I now look at, then what are the good side? What are some of the trends that have come with the growth of the private higher education sector? So of course, it has led to increased student enrollment in both countries. In Malawi, it was very difficult to find latest data, which is also one of the challenges of researching about higher education in Africa. The lack of institutional data, especially latest data on certain topics. So in Malawi, some scholars have argued that because of the diversification in the number of institutional providers insofar as higher education is concerned, there's been an expansive increase in the number of students in the country's higher education sectors. As you can see, in 2008, there were only about 8,000 students. But in 2018 now, it went to 30,000. Probably this time, I wouldn't be surprised if it has reached 60 or 70,000. Then in Zambia, as of 2022, which is the latest data available from the Higher Education Authority, we find that the private higher education sector actually enrolls more students than the public higher education sector, which is quite different from other countries in Africa, which is also very different from other countries outside Africa insofar as private higher education is concerned. So what are some of the factors that have led to that? Of course, there is the provision of tuition fee-based scholarships, which private universities are doing. Okay, then they are also contributing in addressing the rural-urban divide, by establishing satellite campuses, especially in rural areas, providing other alternative means like e-learning, weekend or distance learning modes. And in so doing, they are reaching out to some of the populations which would have been excluded from higher education provision. But then there's also this diversification of learning programs, coming up with new programs. I'll give an example of courses such as actuarial sciences in Zambia. The first university to offer that, it was a private university. And so now the public universities, some of them, like University of Zambia, have introduced that. So you see, in some way, they have been the trendsetters. So all in all, I would summarize the contribution of the private higher education sector, the public good, as that of also producing the public good professionals when they train these graduates, and then supporting, of course, development, which some scholars like Chankestian or they've adopted as GLOCO, which is Global National Local Development, but also fostering investor community engagement. On the downside, there are these issues of cost, quality, and equity, and these are some of the things which have now continued to cast a dark shadow on the private higher education sectors in many countries. Talk of funding, for instance, in Malawi, research shows that private universities are more expensive compared to public universities. Ironically, it's different from Zambia. In Zambia, for my study, which I did as part of my PhD study, the private universities, they are slightly lower than public universities. Yes. So, which was interesting, especially for courses like law, courses like teaching, courses like nursing. The cost of a nursing degree at University of Zambia, for instance, is higher compared to the cost of a nursing degree at a private university like Rockville or Eden University in Zambia. And so because of that, a lot of students now who want to do those courses in Zambia, they go to the private higher education sector. So despite that, I still argue that we cannot run away from the profit motive of the private higher education sector. And this is fostering a trend of knowledge commodification, where in as much as they offer tuition fees, these are just for tuition fees. They do not offer any other support like stipend and other things. So the cost of attending education is still high. And then there's also epistemic inequalities, in the sense that they are providing mostly social science courses. And some of these social science courses, or some of the courses they are offering, they are being provided in environments with compromised quality. And so that then affects the graduate outcome of some of the students. Then there's also discriminatory government student funding policies. What I mean here is that in the Zambian context, for instance, students enrolled in private higher education sectors, they are not eligible for government-funded student loans. These are loans which should be paid back. They are not free grants. But in Zambia, this is only applicable to the students in government universities. In Malawi, it's 20% of the students in private universities, then 80% of the students in public universities who can access funding to these student loans. So we see those discriminatory policies. Then there's the main issue, the issues of quantity versus quality. This, of course, is affected by issues to do with academic mobility, where most of these universities, they do not have adequate staff, adequate qualified staff. So there's the reliance on part-time lecturers, which, of course, has its own implication in terms of things like affiliation with students, things like commitment to research. And so because of this, the universities have ended up being more teaching universities than research universities. Inadequate infrastructure is one of them. There's also some of the lecturers are underqualified, where in both countries, less than 30% of academics have PhDs. The other one is that of the weaker quality assurance architecture. I think I won't explain this in detail, but in conclusion, I'll say I like this quotation by Tristan McCowan when he says, when we look at the private higher education sector, yes, it is both a boon and a bane. But the private sector is not entirely malevolent, nor is the public sector entirely benevolent. Okay, so we can discuss other things related to this. So this is my book for the Zambian context. I drew on this book, which was an offshoot of my PhD study. I developed this during my postdoc, where I looked at widening university access and participation in the Global South. Okay, thank you very much. This is where I end. Thank you.
All right, great, thank you, Edward. Okay, so I'll just say that it does look like we have the missing speakers in the room, so we're going to have to probably move quickly to get everyone, get through all the presentations again. Do we have any questions we'd like to take for Edward here? Any in the room or online?
Just curious about that slide regarding the increasing numbers. So the question about access, which has been, I think you captured it on the one side as boon, but then on the other side, it had questions on quality. One thing that I haven't read the book yet, maybe I'll look for it after, is about whether that those growing numbers have anything to do with access for women or young people as much as for young men. Because you mentioned geographical access. You said that especially the private institutions were working better on that angle because they had satellite campuses in rural areas and they were providing online programs and distance education and so on. Did that make more women able to access higher education in your research?
Okay, thank you very much. It did, yes. Firstly, in Zambia, when it comes to access to higher education, I think the government has put in place affirmative policy action, and gender is one of them. So for those who are applying at University of Zambia, Copperbelt University, there is a certain percentage, I think that is 20 or 15% reserved for female applicants. Even funding is like that. Then the rest, people compete, male, female. And so in public universities, in the cutoff points or the entry points, they are different according to gender. So that is what government is doing. But then for the private universities, yes, it has contributed in the sense that there has been an increase in terms of student enrollment when it comes to the number of female students, because some of them, they don't have to travel, for instance, to Lusaka in the capital city. Others, they are in like the eastern region, Chipata, where there are these satellite campuses. So some of the parents then say, then why not go to a university which is near rather than going to a university which is far? So because of that, they are kind of addressing the spatial inequalities, but in some way also reducing the gap in terms of the gender gap in terms of access to higher education. So it came out, and some of the participants, actually most of my participants, I think, were female students. So I interviewed students aged between 18 to 24 years. So most of them, they shared like their motivation to enter private universities, the experiences, such things.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. I think we're going to move to the next presenter, just to move things along here. Thank you very much, Edward. And so next we have Frederick Gute from KCA University in Kenya. And he will be speaking to us on the impact of private higher education on equity and access, comparing East Africa and Europe. Frederick, can you, looks like you're there in the group. Can you share your slides, please? Brilliant, we see them.
Yeah, I hope you can see my screen.
We can, if you'd like to if you click on the presenter mode so that it goes full screen.
Okay, just a minute.
Afraid it's disappeared now.
Okay, we are good now.
So we see your slide. I mean, the screen you have now is fine, or you can go to the presenter mode. Just up from there, up. To the left.
Where's under design? The view.
Sorry, if you go to slideshow, actually, that should also have that option. Slideshow, right next to review, yeah, and from the beginning.
Yes.
Yep, that's it.
So My name is Frederick Gedoi, and an associate faculty at KCA University. So, and a PhD candidate at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, where I'm doing a PhD in business administration, strategic management. I'm a faculty of business administration at KCA. My research or my paper was about the impact of provision of private higher education on the access and equity of higher education. And I was doing a comparative analysis, trying to compare its impact on here in East Africa, where I'm based, and in Europe. Of course, we are aware that the two sides of the world are quite different in terms of development, in terms of technology, and all those issues. So I was trying to look at how does higher education come in, and how does it bring more equity? Does it make education more accessible? And it has been widely noted by a number of scholars that higher education is a public good. It's something that is good for the people. It's something that can be able to shape up the world and move a country steps forward. And it has also been noted that by introduction of private higher education and the way it has been expanding, for example, you find that in our country we have so many private universities, it has increased the access to education. However, it comes with a cost that is not there when you're talking about public universities. It's quite low compared to the two. So this presentation that I'm going to do here is to examine equity and access issues in private higher education. So we are going now to use East Africa and compare it to Europe. I've also noted here that there's a problem of access of higher education, and mostly when it comes to higher education offered by private institutions. You find that although the private institutions have expanded the opportunities to access higher education, the cost is too high that quite a number of people globally cannot be able to afford it. So you find that, yes, the education has been availed, but it's open to a small group of people and not to everyone. You find that there's quite high tuition, and high tuition restricts access to low-income groups. And you come to a place like East Africa, where I'm based, and you find that over 60% of people are considered low-income groups. So it's only affordable to maybe 40–30% of the groups. We also note that people who live in villages, in rural areas, and marginalized communities are left far behind when it comes to the access of private higher education. So you find again, that group of people, again, does not really benefit because they are not able to. We also find that this issue is not only in one region. It's not only in East Africa or Africa. This is a global issue that people in marginalized communities are not able to access higher education. We also find that issues about tuition is a global issue. We also find that issues to do with the low-income earners is a global issue, but this issue does not manifest the same across the globe. You find that the challenges in different places, what causes inaccessibility of higher education is quite different across the various parts or regions of the world. If we are to consider the Eastern Africa context where I am, or the region, you find that provision of higher education will target the middle and the upper class students. These are students who come from able families, students who come from working families who can be supported by their parents, students who can afford the tuition. This is mostly because tuition is affordable to most of the students in this region. You find that we have so many students who want to access higher education offered by private institutions, but the fees or the high fees is able to limit them. Of course, in terms of the regulations that we have, you find that there is a concern that has been noted by many scholars that the quality of graduates that we get from the quality of education that we get from private university has sometimes been questioned, raising to the concern about are these graduates, can they be employed? So we find that in East Africa we have weak regulations. So as long as someone can afford education, the regulations on how do you go about that education is quite a challenge. So you find that anyone who has money can easily acquire that education. Of course, another challenge is that the state has very limited support to private higher education. So you find that you really get loans or scholarships to assist students join the private institutions. So making education more inaccessible. If you consider from a European context, one of the things you note from secondary data and the research that we're able to do is that they have stronger accreditation and the policy structures. So you find that in that side of the globe, the policy are quite tough. They are quite clear. How can you access education? What is it that you need to do? What is the cutoff for this? What steps do you need to undertake? How long does it take? However, the tuition fee for private education remains a big issue. It's a barrier that still limits quite a high number of students. And enrollment may rise, but social mobility again stagnates. Also, you find that there's increasing political tension around public subsidies, that there are concerns about why do we have to keep on subsidizing issues about private education in the European context. So if you're comparing the two, and we're looking at various aspects, the first aspect we're talking about is accessibility for low-income students. You find that in East Africa region, you find that it is limited due to high fees and few support options. That we still don't have support options. The fees is high, but we don't have the support system. The government has very limited support system to students joining the private universities. You find that in Europe, it is restricted by high fees, but they have better aid systems. So there's affordability there. You can get scholarships, you can get loans. So it's a bit aided. It's better compared to East Africa. When you talk about regulatory oversight, you find that we have weak oversight in East Africa, and this has led to concerns about quality and fairness of that education. Is it just being offered because people have money? And what is the quality that we get? And then you also find that when we look at comparing it to Europe, you find that they have stronger regulations that ensure better standards. So you find there the path is clear. You know exactly what you need to do, and there's the way to enforce that. When you look at social mobility in East Africa, you find that it's limited. Private higher education mainly serves people in the middle and upper class, wealthy people. Poor people still have to line up in public universities. But when you go to Europe, it's the social mobility is mixed. Enrollment rises, but social mobility gains more uneven. So you find here that the social mobility is a bit mixed compared to East Africa. When you talk about government support, you find that in East Africa, there's minimal financial aid and weak scholarship programs. You find that the financial aid to access education in the private sector or in the private institution becomes quite a challenge. Even when public universities start to introduce that model, it suffers a lot. You find also that there are no scholarship programs or there are minimal scholarship programs. But in Europe, you find that it's moderate to high with some public subsidies. So you find that there's moderate financial aid, and also there's some public subsidies that you can be able to get. When we look at affordability of tuition, you find that in East Africa, tuition is generally unaffordable for most students, and they cannot be able to afford private universities. But when compared to Europe, you find that affordability varies, but it's still a big challenge. It's still a big barrier to affordability of higher education. And then we ask ourselves, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of education not being of not being accessible or inequitable access, where few people can access and not everyone? This is able to reinforce the social economic inequalities. You find that the societies we have, the people doing well, there's a gap between the rich and the poor. And sometimes this higher education has been able to reinforce that people question, where did you go to the university? You find that people went to private university have a big gap compared to the others. You also find that if there's a lot of growth of provision of higher education without equality, this will undermine the public good mission of higher education. Yes, that higher education was brought on board as something good, as something that was meant to promote equality and fairness and such things. But if it becomes accessible, it undermines all those things. Then the other concern is that it raises a concern of profit-driven institutions without accountability. That although education is a public good, when it is offered by the private institution, the issue of profitability comes in. And when people are sometimes focusing on profitability, they forget the issue of accountability. How do we get where we are? It also has the risk of academic devaluation and weakened employability outcomes. That sometimes we are risking to devalue the education. That sometimes anyone can access that. Anyone, as long as you have money, you can be able to buy yourself a certificate. And sometimes you cannot even be employed with a certificate because you lack the skills and the capacity to understand what you learned in school. What are some of the interventions that are there that are promising? The first one is that there can be targeted scholarships for disadvantaged groups in the society, that those people living with disabilities, from marginalized groups, from low-income earners, at least they can get some scholarships. We can also have loan schemes that are able to assist students. They can be pegged on after you graduate, or once you get a job, you will earn a certain percentage, you pay the loans way later. Then we can also have delivery in terms of PPP, the public-private partnerships. It was sometimes done in our country, Kenya, but it was dropped in later. But you find that could be a good thing, that a PPP, that the government can have some of its students in the private sector. That will bring down the concern that only the wealthy join private universities, and over time it will kill down those social issues. Then we also have to have greater emphasis on regulatory and oversight and accountability, that we have to keep on checking how do we make sure that education is well regulated, people are not buying certificates, that there's a lot of accountability from the universities, that the graduates they provide can be able even to get jobs. When we talk about policy recommendations, we need to build a robust regulatory framework, particularly in East Africa, that we really need to have a regulatory framework that works, that is able to check our graduates across the East African region, that we can be able to verify that if I went to this country in this university, maybe not in a home country, but in a different country in East Africa, can we be able to ensure that that certificate is legit? So we need to have a regulatory framework that everyone can see the path you took in higher education. We also need to expand financial aid mechanisms. We need to have grants and loans and such things to be able to have some incentives to private institutions, to private higher education institutions, to enable them to move on. We also need to strengthen monitoring of academic quality and graduate outcomes, that we need to keep on checking what is the quality of education that we are getting from the private institutions. We also need to encourage a lot of cross-regional learning and collaborations, that our universities can work across the regions. We can have our faculty also learning from the very best institutions that we have in the world. To conclude, we note that private higher education plays a key role, but must be guided by equity, must be guided by equity principles. Yeah, that the role that the private education plays is very key, and we understand that, but it has to be guided. We have to make sure that education is affordable and brings a lot of equity in the society. And also that access should not be a function of income, that we should be able to make education so accessible that the income or where you come from does not dictate the type of education you're going to afford. It should reward your ability, what you have and your dreams, not where you came from. We also note that solutions exist, but require political will and sustained investment. The political will, that the personal factors, the government is willing to support the solutions to make education accessible even in the private institutions, by encouraging sustained investment, that the government is investing in these institutions through PPPs and such things. Also a call for action for government, educators, and researchers to realign their priorities. That this is for all of us, educators, the researchers, that we align our priorities and make education more accessible and affordable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Frederick. All right. All right, thank you very much, Frederick. We did run over there a little bit. It's hard to signal to the online presenters when the timings of things, but so we're pretty tight on our time here. Can I just check if there are any questions for Frederick? It doesn't look like there are any in the chat, and I think no. I have a quick one. I don't know how quick it is. I'll see if I can just squeeze it in. I was just wondering about like how, because you're looking at entire regions and different systems within those regions, and they look at privatization of higher education in different ways. And so I just wondered if you could say something about how, like Kenya, for example, has public institutions that also have private tracks in them. So they will also have private enrollments for those who are willing to pay. So it's using a public institution for that purpose. And then separate to that is what you're talking about, and then separately, Edward, speaking to private institutions, wholesale. I'm trying to remember what my question was there, but basically, surely those have different implications for policymakers and for some of the recommendations you were saying about regulations and about loans and other kinds of remedies. They speak to different kinds of privatization, so different problems. Does that resonate at all with your research? Like, do you see different kinds of privatization needing different kinds of interventions?
Yeah, there are various kinds of intervention that has been put in place in different regions. You find that the challenge with these interventions, mostly in our region, East Africa, is a political goodwill. That sometimes you find the government is willing in the private institutions, but then after you get a new government, that policy is dropped out again. So you find it's not sustainable in the long term. So we need to have policies that are able to ensure that that the government invest in private education throughout, because they are trying to decongest public institutions. You find that sometimes the public institutions are so crowded, so we need to have the private institution. But if again the government we don't have sustainable models to ensure that the private education has to continue, then they only have to target the people from who are doing well in life, the people who are in the upper class. But one of our recommendations is that the government must keep on investing in private education, and this has to be done through grants, loans, scholarships, and also the private sector has to come in and as part of giving back to the society. That is in the paper.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Great. Thank you very much for that reply there. Edward's got his hand up, but we really got to move to the next. Is it a quick question?
It's just a quick one.
Super quick.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was just interested in finding out, like for Africa, you said East Africa, and then for Europe, it was the whole continent. Any thoughts behind that? So were you presenting like for the general Europe, or you had Western Europe? Because I can imagine what is happening in Eastern Europe would be different from Western Europe in terms of the private higher education. Any thoughts on that?
No. For Europe, we concentrated more on the UK. Maybe I should have put it in the United Kingdom. That's where we concentrated. You find that in East Africa, we were able to do it because this is where we are best able to get a lot of data in terms of primary data and such. But for Europe, we purely dependent on the what we call secondary data. Maybe that's why we talked about Europe. But the more we mostly concentrated on the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Frederick. All right. All right, great. We're going to move straight on to Esther Macedo from the Brazilian National Institute for Educational Research, INEP. And over to you, Esther.
Hi there. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, we can see and hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Let me see here. Presentation mode. Yep, you're there with me.
Yeah.
And
So
timer.
yes, please.
Okay, so moving on to South America, I'll talk a little bit about how things have been moving here in Brazil in the last couple of decades, and how we've been thinking about well, the cliche of university for everyone is very common, and we know all the initiatives and UNESCO's initiatives about education for all, and of course over the last couple of decades there've been a lot of traction, but also need for refinement for who is everyone really included, and to think of these the meaning of these terms. It's important, and that's part of what we're going to be reflecting here and we'll be reflecting about. Because, from a social perspective, we have to think not only about how to expand access, and of course we want to widen access, but also how to support students so that they have, success, and that trajectory is meaningful to their lives. And from the standpoint of view of working in quality assessment in the Ministry of Education in Brazil, we have to say that we have advanced as a country in providing access, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. So the idea here is just a quick overview of numbers and a few reflections of how to make sense of that. So I've got a lot of slides. I'm thinking about about 4 slides a minute, but it's just to give a bit of an overview of how the landscape has changed in the country, and how we can take it from there. So I'll be using as a conceptual framework in the little time that we have for reflection to think of these data. These 2 authors that studied, back when I was a doctoral student, that helps me to think of ways to move forward. So a few facts and fiction about higher education in Brazil. It is understandable, common sense to think that in a country like Brazil, there's more demand for higher education than spots available, and there are not sufficient resources to secure spots for everyone, be it for public or private resources. And as a matter of fact, we have our National Education Plan, which is a 10-year plan, which just expired last year, and the Congress still hasn't provided a new one. It's still under discussion, but one of the goals for 2024 was to raise gross enrollment to 50% and net rate to 33, and increase the offering in the public sector. And this is a complicated visual, but just for you to see the types of institutions we have in Brazil. And, all blue here is private for-profit and then private non-profit. So that's about 80%. And we're talking about, enrollments and courses and institutions. And the light blue here are the public, be federal or municipal or state level. And here are the types of institutions. So we have universities, but also colleges. And the lighter green here are like professional, federal professional institutes, like professional training. So to have an idea of the size of the higher education landscape in Brazil. So Brazil has a population of about 200 million people, and about 22 million people are between 18 and 24. So that's about 10% of the population. And so we saw that our goal for 2024 was to have 50% of the growth rate enrolled in higher education. We are at about 40% now. So we have, that was 2023. We're near 10 million now, but still not there in the 50%. And when we look exclusively at the population from 18 to 24 to do the net rate, we're a bit short of the 33% mark with 25%. I'm going to show very quickly some slides that the Department of Statistics here ENEP produced and released last October. So it's still our institute, it's not our department, but it's just so beautiful. This slide here shows that we haven't reached the mark that we wanted, but we have improved a lot in the last 10 years, which is a good thing. And this slide here shows where our population in 18 to 24 are. So yellow here show that they finished high school, but are not in school anymore, so not in higher education. 7% are still in high school. The green have our higher education are in higher education now, so that's our 21% net, and 4% have already finished. Where the green, the red, they're not in high school. They're still 1% still in elementary school. Here shows us relative to OECD countries and OECD aspiring countries. So Brazil has increased, but still, number 4 or 5 in the study of population with higher education. So we still have a lot of people in Brazil that have not finished or are not in high school. And the problem is we have expanded offer, and where are these students and why can't we attract them? So just to give an overview, in the last 20 years, we have had this huge expansion in our system. So we have, increased number of institutions. Enrollment is almost to 10 million now. The orange is private and the blue is public. And public in Brazil means free of cost for students, so tuition free. So our programs have increased greatly, and I particularly like this one with the vocation training that has increased a lot in the last 20 years. This shows enrollment. So, we see now that remote learning is almost crossing on-site learning, and it's a strong driver now. But this one, all the ones were from the Department of Statistics. This I made from their microdata that shows that the light blue columns is the offer. So we have increased the offer, but we see here in the line, we have enrollment going from 2010 to 2023. It goes from 2 million to 5 million. So yeah, we more than doubled, but the increase in offer has not been accompanied by an increase in enrollment. And that is the question that I bring and I've been puzzling over. And more sad still, we haven't had that much of an increase in concluding students. So the ones that leave with a diploma. So it has gone from, 1 million to 1.4 million. And that's about 28% of those coming in. And it's about, 10%, 5% of the spots offered. And you say, well, that's because the private system has increased in out of proportion. But if you only look at the federal system, and that's the most prestigious and free of charge, we see also that the offer is twice the number of people that actually come in. And, graduating still about 50% as well. So this is unsettling, right? This is very unsettling. This coming again, it's another unsettling graph from our census. So in general, like if we look at all the spots that we have in the system, we only attract about 20% of all the spots that we have open. And okay, federal institutions, state level institutions are all public. They fill about 50-70% of their spots. Private institutions, not so many, but still, we thought that the problem was that we didn't have enough structure, right? And this is one that I made is especially for you today. So 20 years ago, there were about 5 million candidates and only about 2 million seats available. And we would have about a million students coming in because not all of them were accepted or accepted where they wanted to go. Nowadays, we have 15 million candidates. Yay, we have 22 million people 18 to 22, so that's great. But we now have 25 million spots and only 5 million coming students. So we have about 82% of our spots are available, and they're there, right? How do we make it more inviting? Why aren't people coming? So of course it changes, not only public to private, but also the course of study that they choose. And here, it's a breakdown. Medicine, of course, it's a very competitive, and it's the first entry degree in Brazil, is the most competitive, but still there. It's about 95% of the spots are filled. But then you go down, and if you want to become a physics teacher, the bottom here, in the public system, about 50% of the spots are filled. In the private system, just about 2%. And, well, where is everyone? Another problem here is that those that come in, they don't graduate. So here, separated by program of study. So medicine is the one that's most competitive and keeps their students, but still, people, incoming class of 2017, by 2023, 19% had quit, 77 had finished. This is like 6 years later, right? So that should be enough for you to finish your degree, and 4% were still working on it. But then you go to other courses like pharmacy, architecture, nursing, civil engineering, and production engineering. You have 50-60% of people dropping out, having dropped out 6 years later. So that's a lot of energy and resources. If you go to professional degrees, that's even worse. So here's aesthetics and cosmetics, radiology, environmental management, agricultural manager, hospital management, and workspace safety. We have up to 75% dropout. And again, another graph for you. So in the bachelor degrees, we have, out of 100 spots, only 30% are filled and only 11% graduate, considering class 2023. The vocational professional degrees, it's more like this. So we only have 3% of the spots offered are actually successful at the end. And this is on-site learning, and this is remote learning. You only have 2% at the end. So we go back to our assumptions, and you go like, okay, we thought that the problem was there are no spots available, but we have, and we're failing to attract young people, and then when they go in, we're failing to support them. So we have this huge dropout rate, and we have a lot of idle spots, even in prestigious public institutions. And we have these questions. So it is a matter of fact that the public free institutions are more prestigious, and they're still filled by people with a wealthier socioeconomic background than those that go to private education. And so you have the situation where we have federal bursaries and federal loans, and the young people themselves and their families are choosing or are left with private education over going to the free of cost public education. So from, as a citizen, that concerns me, as a scholar, that concerns me, but working in the Ministry of Education, I go, come on, what can we do to revert it? And of course, it's a long, complicated problem. And I know that we don't have a lot of time, and I have tons of slides to show you. But part of what I think we have to think about, and I bring these two authors because back when I was a doctoral student 20 years ago, they were the ones that changed the way I saw representation and differential treatment. And I think that's something that we have to think about to hear and to think with different actors in the different segments of policy and practice and scholarship, to think of how we can bring higher education to more people and to democratize it. Lee, how are you doing for time? I have tons of slides yet. How much time are you giving me?
We have about 1 minute left.
We have 1 minute left. Well, if I had more time to show you, I'd just go through my slides and say what I would tell you about. I would show you how this framework helps us to see, the entrance into higher education. So we see that the people that come in, it's about, 30%, but different ethnicities. If we look at the initiatives that we have in terms of bursary loans and the quota laws, we see that they've been decreasing even though they're quite successful. They are segmentized by ethnicities, and they deliver different ratios outgoing, in the sense that those that have loans and that have come in with reserve because of their ethnicities or social backgrounds, they fare better. So I'll show you all that. Of course, I don't have time for that. If we show disability too, we see that the provisions are very interesting in terms of the fact that we have tried to make it more accessible, even thinking about socioeconomic and race and disability, but still structural racism is present. And we don't have as much publicity, even when we provide access and try to make it more welcoming and try to support students in a different manner. We see better results, both in how they complete and the grades that they obtain. But still, that doesn't capitalize to saying this is success. This needs spotlight. We need to do more of this. We need more visibility and prestige for these initiatives, right? So I would go and talk a lot more about how thinking of difference and moving from more atomized ideas such as autonomy and thinking more in terms of heterogeneity and empowerment is powerful in thinking about how being socially located agents, and that means students and scholars and teaching faculty and policymakers, how we can capitalize on the powers that we bring to our cross-cutting positions. Because if we think of this way, if we think of difference as relational ways to leverage what I can do, as I started working on this as international student in Canada, and it was at that point that I say, well, feminism brings something to me, decolonial studies brings something to me, to think about race and to think about disability brings something that makes it easier for me to act, not just as a student at this moment, but also as a faculty member, but also as a policy maker. And we can leverage that to think of how we can support each other and empower each other to make our higher education scenario in a way that is more plural, in the sense, and the play on words is that we don't want a university that is a university for everyone, in the sense that the universal is one size fits all, and that one size fits all is usually, white, middle class, well abled, and heterosexual. We want to think how we can make it more inviting and celebrate differences, so that we can think beyond of just, the ivory tower, but think of higher education as really permeating and improving how we think and we exist in our society today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Thank you for also some really rich, colorful statistics there. Would you be comfortable sharing your slides with the participants at the conference today? Is this something that
Yeah,
you
I would
could share?
love to.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time on them. I really
Yeah.
like these statistics and these visuals, it really helps us to engage with our public, because of course we do a lot of articulation with the higher education faculty and administration across Brazil, and they are here to be shared so that people can reflect upon them and see what can we do to go beyond just, okay, now we made the spots, how do we bring people in and keep them there and happy. Yeah, so love to share.
That would be great, thank you. And that gives us some time to digest all those slides, your conceptual framework and so on. That's great, thank you. We did have a question from the audience, a member of the online audience. However, we only have 15 minutes left to this panel before everyone will flood the room for the closing remarks of today's event. So we're gonna have to just move straight to the next presenter, who is. They have all arrived, it looks like. So we have Fanleha, Mohammed Adil Iqbal. I believe you're with us. If you'd like to unmute your mics, Mohammed Rashid, and Brian Chung as well, I believe. So we have 4 presenters for this panel here. And as I said, it is going to be a bit tight. We have exactly 15 minutes. So to the best of your ability, if you can stick to the time, that would be much appreciated. So yes, this final presentation here, elite private higher education in Malaysia, Pakistan. So we're doing a comparative look at the contributions and insights and transformative possibilities. So over to you.
All right, thank you. I hope I can make it within the time limit. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you, and good evening here from Malaysia. So I'm Brandon, and I'm joined here with Prof. Fanleha, also with Dr. Adil Iqbal, and also Dr. Rashid. So today I will be presenting on what are the kind of things that we have overlooked when we look at elite private higher education system within the context of post-colonial Malaysia and Pakistan, and whereby the whole notion of what is elite and what is private higher education often been criticized for really perpetuating elitism. But we kind of like overlook that they actually do contribute in terms of as being providers of public good within this global South context. So just to set the scene here, what I'll be focusing today would be 2 countries, and I'll be focusing on the case of Malaysia, also the case of Pakistan over here. And these are like a preview of what actually our arguments that private higher education in these 2 countries can actually serve as providers of public good. In this case here, we argue that private higher education, they can actually bridge social and racial ethnic gaps. That's one. Second, we also argue that private higher education can also enrich or be providers of high quality education, and also perhaps provide incentives for the public institutions to actually improve themselves. And third, we also argue that having private higher educations, they also are able to provide students with affordable means to access international education and also international opportunities. And lastly, we also feel that private higher education are also providers of public good in the sense that they can unlock opportunities that first as means for people to achieve upward social mobility. So I will start with the case of Malaysia first. So within the case of Malaysia, just to give you an historical overview, Malaysia gains its independence from Britain in about 1957, and the whole nation as Malaysia itself was formed in 1963. And in 1971, there is a new economic policy that was being introduced, and the whole purpose of this policy was to restructure the whole socio-economic imbalances across the major ethnic groups that constitutes Malaysians during those times. The reason why there is a major socio-economic imbalances was also a legacy and a result of how the British have colonized Malaya back then, and the approach was to divide and rule. So what happens is that they kept these 3 races along their whole economic occupations, and also in their own respective residences areas. So you would find that the Malays were mainly contained within working in the agriculture sector in a rural area. And same goes with the Indians as well. They were working in the plantations, whereby the Chinese were mostly business people at the urban areas, working together alongside with the elite Malays back then. So over time, there is a huge economic imbalance because the rich people, the people who are actually doing business, they mainly stayed in the in the urban areas, and they got richer over time. And whereby the other ethnic groups like the Malays and Indians, where they were mainly working in the agriculture sector, they were pretty much left behind over the years. So this dissatisfaction among the ethnic groups there, whereby some ethnic groups were considered to be more progressive ahead in terms of their socio-economic status. So that led to a tension, and there was a deadly racial riot in 1969. So to resolve this issue, the government came up with this new economic policies, hoping that it would work to rebalance all of these economic imbalances. So what happened is that since then, in the 90s, many years after that, there is actually a rise in private higher education system, and also the whole transnational education system also became very popular in the 90s. So this is the historical what happened actually in the mid 50s and also in the 70s. The result of the new economic policy that were trying to restructure the socio-economic imbalances, what the government has done back then was to provide larger university admissions to the natives Bumiputra, which Bumiputra is like a whole umbrella term that refers to the Malay ethnic group, also the natives in East Malaysia, in Sabah and Sarawak. So these people are the ones that were pretty much economically behind. So they felt that they need to have this policy to encourage more representation of Malays in higher education. So the result of this would be that having greater access, greater quota allocated to the Malays, which means the non-Malays, the non-Bumiputras, their access to higher education system was pretty much limited back then. And the other challenges that Malaysia was also facing, that they were trying to move from an agriculture-based economy towards a knowledge-based economy. This means that they actually need a bigger talent workforce to actually for them to achieve being a knowledge-based economy there, which means they also need more talented and more educated workforce as well. But there are not enough universities and sports itself to actually accommodate everyone. And with that as well, because there is not enough spots for many students to actually enter the public universities, they would have to find alternative ways to get access to higher education. So most of them actually would go abroad. And with the whole situation of the weakening ringgit in the 90s and also the 80s there, and the government also wants to reduce their spending on sponsoring students by sending them overseas, or also to avoid students from going overseas as well, so they could actually keep the revenues within the national borders. And this also helps to reduce the brain drains. So with these challenges in mind, the private higher education come in and also can serve a good role in being a provider of public goods. So how they do this is that the private universities in Malaysia, they actually flourished in the 90s. So there is actually a demand for higher education. So they come in to fill up these gaps, this lack of access for higher education demand, especially among the non-Bumiputra students. In other words, the Chinese population, the Chinese students and the Indian students in Malaysia, they now can have access to higher education, but it's within being offered by the private sector over here. So on one hand, they also have tried to address the university quota restrictions that tends to favor the Bumiputra students. The other issue is that many Chinese students students from Chinese independent high schools, their high school certificate were also not being recognized by the high school government. So they also unable to attend higher education. So the only way they could get higher education is to go to the private sector over there. And with the mushrooming of private higher education in Malaysia, they also started to offer a lot of transnational education, meaning that there's a lot of twinning programs that was being established. Also, international branch campuses as well was being established in Malaysia as well. And these twinning programs themselves, they are offering programs that are that the qualifications itself were all tied to Western-based universities. So having this private higher education, they are able to provide high quality education as well, because all of these programs comes from the UK and also from Australia and also from America. And so this means that students are able to access affordable international based education right at home without needing to go overseas as well. And this also are able to strengthen their graduate employability, because now they have qualification and they're able to secure employment as well. So now let me move on to the case of Pakistan. So Pakistan gained its independence in the 40s there and in the 70s. And back then they were already had private higher education as well, but they were being nationalized. And then this policy was being reversed a few years later. Their challenges in Pakistan, what they were experiencing is that there were not enough seats in the public universities to accommodate everyone. And also the private sector as well, the tuition fees is way too high. So students are having really a hard time trying to access higher education in Pakistan. And the other challenges that they are facing is that public universities in Pakistan as well, they are very much underfunded, so they were not able to provide high quality education and also adequate facilities to actually offer and give a good education experience to the students. And then the third challenge would be there was a lot of high graduate employment levels in Pakistan, mostly because there was a mismatch of the graduation, the skills that they have upon graduation, and also what was the kind of skills that was needed in the labor market back then. So the programs were not basically not designed very well. They were just matching with each other. So how did private higher education in Pakistan come in to actually be sort of like being seen as a provider of public good? So private higher education in Pakistan are indeed expensive, but there are also some private higher educations that are non-profit oriented. So these non-profit oriented ones, they actually offer a lot of tuition subsidies, also student loans, and also scholarships as well that enable a lot of students to access higher education. And also they are able to provide employment opportunities to their own graduates, which means they actually rehire or they hire their own graduates into their own institutions. And with that as well, because they are non-profit oriented and also they are well funded by some like philanthropic group there, so they're able to actually have the funds to recruit well qualified academic staff, and whereby they also able to provide high quality education. And with that as well, the high quality education, they are also able to provide students with the relevant skill sets that enable them to get jobs, and also they help to serve the public good by assisting the government with any of the policy makings or be providers of professional development training programs, and also to come in whenever there's a public health related crisis as well. And some universities, they have some university hospitals, and they are also very well funded. So they have all the latest facilities and are able to provide really good quality of healthcare as well. And they also help to promote gender equity by increasing women access to higher education. So these are the ways that private higher education in both Malaysia and Pakistan are able to contribute to the public good in these two countries over here. So what me and my colleagues are arguing is that some private higher educations, they have successfully achieved what they called or being perceived as elite status there. But how people in these regions, in Malaysia and Pakistan, view what is elite is very much different to what perhaps was being discussed. The whole notion of elitism is being discussed in the Western discourses. So let's look at Malaysia first. So in the historical context in Malaysia during the colonial times, English medium schools were available. They were being provided by the English people, by the British back then. And English medium schools, the students who actually attended these schools there, they actually eventually managed to get greater access to higher education, also lucrative employment, and also in a way they're being seen as being part of the elite group, because most of these students who attended these English medium schools, they were affluent students from affluent families, and they were living in the rural areas, in the urban areas. And in today's context, the whole notion of a global university rankings, they position the international branch campuses that we have here in Malaysia, like Monash University and also Reading University of Reading here. So these universities are well-established universities in their own respective home countries, like the Russell Group, or also the Group of Eight in the case of Australia. So all these universities that enters Malaysia and establish their own branch campuses here, they have already developed a very good reputation. And so they were being seen as world-class universities, and any students who actually enrolled themselves and get a degree from these universities in Malaysia itself, they are also being perceived as being a world-class graduates. And private higher education in Malaysia as well, because they are very expensive. So students who actually come into these universities as well, they also are predominantly come from a background whereby their families are already very much affluent, so that they are able to afford all these high tuition fees in this private higher education in Malaysia. And with that as well, the students who will graduate from international branch campuses, not just from international branch campuses, but also other private higher educations institutions in Malaysia, they also enjoy better graduate employability, more so in the private sector here, that actually do prefer to hire graduates with superior English proficiency. So the context here is that because many students they are not able to enter the public universities, and the public universities are mainly catered for the majority group of Malays. So the Malays themselves, when they come out and they graduate, they tend to go to the public sector over there, which actually uses Malay as the working language rather than English here. The private sector, the businesses, what English would be the working language. So the private sector would actually prefer very much to hire graduates from private institutions rather than the public sectors, due to the perceived differences in the language proficiency. So this actually itself have implications when some universities are being seen as being more elite than the other here, and also students who graduate from these universities have better graduate employability. So one of the implications, the first one here would be having a risk of further widening the socioeconomic disparities that was already happened and being observed since independence as a legacy from the British way of ruling Malaya back then. So this could actually widen the socioeconomic disparities between actually those students who have better English proficiency compared to those. Because in the private sector, those who actually can prove that they speak English very well, they can also command a higher salary also. And another implication would be the existence of the private higher education system in Malaysia here meant that the non-Bumiputra students here, the minority from the minority groups, they are still able to bypass the quota restrictions and still able to access higher education in their own ways here. And more so, they are able to achieve upward social mobility through accessing all of this, what we call elite private higher education. In the case of Pakistan here, will be slightly different. So in Pakistan as well, they do have English medium schools back then, also was mainly attended by affluent locals. And today, private higher education in Pakistan can be perceived as elitist when, once again, the same points that was raised by the previous presenters, private higher education are very expensive and can only be afforded by those students who comes from affluent, rich families here. And also private higher education are being seen as elitist because they have the funds and the ability to provide higher quality education environment compared to the public funds, the public universities in Pakistan who actually lack the funds and are not able to provide such experiences as well. But we argue that elitism might not necessarily be just that it could also emerge in a very different form. So in the case of Pakistan, private higher education, elitism could actually emerge among those institutions that are non-profit oriented. So because it's important to note that private higher education in Pakistan, not all of it can be considered as world-class university, just because they can afford all of those resources and facilities. None of them are highly ranked as well. Only a very few universities are highly ranked. So for these universities to be ranked itself, they would be already seen as elite in some ways and sort of reinforce their elite status as well. And this non-profit nature of these institutions, they are also can be considered as elite because they are not profit driven, but they are focused on improving the social welfare with the goal of delivering world-class education. And prestige for this elite private higher education system here could be derived from some institutions like the former Christian College University. They have a rich historical track record for producing prominent leaders and public figures in Pakistan themselves. So to recap, these are the four main ways that we argue that private higher education can actually contribute to public good here in both contexts in Malaysia and Pakistan. And before I conclude, I just want to say that all of these notions of whether just because universities are within the private sector and there is an assumption that they need to be profit driven here, and they can either be providers of public good and private good, all of these division is a bit too simplistic here. We also need to take note that sometimes there are more things that are happening beneath it, and we also need to be sensitive that there are actually aspiring youths who are eager to really transform themselves to move up the social ladder. Even though this involves them spending a lot of money to enroll into all these institutions. So example, like in the case of Malaysia, non-Bumiputra students here, they could still fulfill their aspirations to access world-class education right at home through enrolling into international branch campuses here. And when with that qualifications that they get, they are able to access high-paying roles. Same goes with Pakistan as well. Low-income students here, they are able to be access scholarships and get themselves enrolled into all these institutions and achieve employment as well. Not just low-income students, but also for Pakistan women as well. They are also able to given opportunities to access professional employment also. So we need to pay close attention to all of these complexities. So I just want to highlight that there is one concern that we should be mindful of, that whether if there's an over-reliance of private higher education as providers of higher education in the sense of being a public good, can it be a convenient band-aid solution for governments who are perhaps unwilling to address the deeper issues like the social inequality issues over here? So we argue that private higher education, once again, they can actually be a transformative agents for those living at the fringes of society, but this potential for them to be transformative agents can only be achieved if there's a collaborative effort between the public and the private sectors here, and with a common goal, which is to address existing social issues that are happening within these two countries over here in Malaysia and Pakistan. And that's all that I have for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Brendan, thank you. That's quite an interesting analysis that you've got there. We're going to have to wrap up only because we've got a crowd waiting for us outside of the room. Just want to say it's striking to me that always when I read about Malaysia, it's compared to the UAE, not only because of the the presence of transnational providers, but also the sort of two-tier access system that you described. You see a similarity between the two. Although in Malaysia everyone is a Malaysian national, there's still this two bifurcated system going on. And so I think actually you're pointing to a totally different system. Pakistan is quite interesting, and it draws out new ways of thinking about public and private goods they produce. So I think that's quite neat. We gotta wrap up there. But Brendan, I wanted to ask, would you be happy to share your slides with the attendees from today's event?
Sure. Yes,
yeah,
I'll be happy
great.
to
So
share.
we can spend a little more time looking at them and follow up with questions if that's okay. Yeah.
All right.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you, Brendan,
very much.
for your lovely presentation.